So I was saying that I had the good fortune for many decades now to be in the company of sincere people and devotees, and also coming here and meeting many friends and devotees. And that's a great joy for me to do that. But there's a price I have to pay every time I come, administered by the Sunita Parasarama. So I have to sit here and speak something which will be totally forgotten when you walk out that door. So it would probably be better if we just sit and meditate. We'll gain more from that meditation than me sitting here speaking. And there's nothing special I know that you already don't know or have not heard. And they asked Bhagavan, what are the restrictions or the rules for a sadhaka? You can read it in the book Spiritual Instruction. And Bhagavan gave very few rules or restrictions. He said there are 1, moderation in food, 2, moderation in sleep, and 3, which is my point I'm trying to bring out now, moderation in speech. So that's difficult for me to do, and I prefer to do that. And because in Arunachala Ashram, where I live, and a few others live, the resident devotees consider themselves to be the servants of the Master's children. And everyone here is the Master's children. I lived in a friend's house who was well-to-do in Delhi cantonment. He had a big house and maybe 6 servants in the 1980s. I was working on a project. He was helping me. And when I was there, I observed the servants there, how they just served the master, their guests, their children, and kept a distance. And their only purpose was to make those people comfortable and not be in the way or even be seen. So I took that as a lesson that is what a real devotee living in Bhagavan's ashram and anywhere can really follow to get fulfillment and happiness in life. When I was young, I used to have in my room a saying on the wall that I took from the Imitation of Christ. You may have heard of that book. It was a book, one of 2 books that Swami Vivekananda had with him when he traveled around India after Ramakrishna Paramahansa passed away. He had the Bhagavad Gita, and the other book was The Imitation of Christ. And I kept it on my wall because I found one little statement in there that helped me a lot. It said, "Study, my son, to do the will of another rather than your own. Seek always the lowest place and be subject to everyone. And study and pray always that the will of God may be totally fulfilled in you." By the will of God being fulfilled in you, that means that you surrender completely to God. And only God alone exists. So now I do that, I try to my ability and best to do that in the ashram. And everyone can do that, have that same attitude as a servant, even in the family life or the workplace, and get fulfillment and satisfaction and feel at ease and free, because you're not responsible, you're just serving the Master. Who is the Master in the case of a family person? I don't want to say that for Sanitya, but there he is. Not only him, your children. And who's the Master for that person there? There she is. I mean, these are who we serve everyone as if they are God or they're God's children. And in that way, our ego will slowly wears down. As it wears down, we have more and more peace, more and more freedom. We feel more and more happiness. By serving everyone, making them happy, now they say, well, how can I be humble and still progress in my ambition to rise in my profession to the highest of my potential? How can I do that? So what is the purpose of life? Is it to rise to the highest position in your profession, in your company, and whatever you want to. No, that's not the real meaning and purpose of life. The real meaning, purpose in life is to know who you are, to know what you are, to experience the true nature of yourself. That only can give you the highest fulfillment, or the perfect fulfillment. Otherwise, we'll be struggling here and struggling there, trying to get better grades, or the grades are very important for these children, of course. But we should know that that's not the real meaning and purpose of life. That's our occupation, and we should do it to the best of our ability. And one point in this, but we should do it with detachment. We all have a destiny. We all have prarabdha, karma. And what's going to happen is going to happen. When we come out of the womb, the book of our life comes with us. It's already written. This is what Bhagavan says. So Devaraj Madalya said, okay, I'm picking up this fan, I'm putting it down here. Now I understand that the main aspects of my life, my birth, my getting married, my death, are all predestined. But what about me picking up this fan, moving it and putting it here? Is that predestined? Bhagavan said, certainly that's predestined. Everything outwardly happening in your life is predestined. So naturally, the lawyer that Devaraj Madalya was countered and said, well, if that's the case, what freedom do we have? We have no freedom if everything's predestined. And Bhagavan said, you have one freedom. That freedom is to turn within and detach yourself from it and realize your true nature. That's the freedom you have. What's going to happen outwardly with your body, with the actions, with your profession, with all your life aspects, that's all predestined. It's hard to understand. A person who is in the state or abiding in the source or abiding in the self sees it happening. He knows that that's how it happens. But we project our little selves, our egos, and say, no, that's not going to, I don't see how this works. I have to fight hard. I have to have ambition, desire. Where ultimately realize that the desireless state is the happiest state. To desire nothing is to be without thought, is to be free. So now I had a friend who used to live in San Ramon, and some of you have known him. I consider him a good example of a grahasta sadhak who practiced that everything belonged to Bhagavan. And he worked to the best of his ability. He raised very high in his profession, but he knew that the purpose of life was to realize his source. Now, some of you know, he died in the year 2010. His name was Ravi Ramana, the son of the president. Now, I used to visit him when he was here because we used to have the Satsangs, or we used to have the Jayanthi program, and he used to live in San Ramon. He worked for a company called Selectron. He was then the quality control officer of the corporation. And they wanted to set up a manufacturing plant in Madras. And he was all excited. He could go back to India. And then he could be near Ramana. And but then came some financial problem with the company, and they reneged on that. So he quit the job and got another job. He thought, oh, I can earn enough in a short time and then go back to India. But he used to tell me he had a house in Hartford, Connecticut. He was working for the largest equity corporation in America, or the world perhaps. And he used to tell me, whatever I have here belongs to Bhagavan. It's all for the service of Bhagavan. So, he was a great soul. And his wife told me, when they got married, in fact, they're first cousins. They go to Tirupati and they get married. And they go there. Is that a custom to go to Tirupati after you get married? Mm-hmm. Maybe that was their family deity. So they went to Tirupati. Is there steps going up there? You have to climb any steps? So at the bottom of the steps, they pray. And it's something relating to the fulfillment of their new family life. Now they're married. So Ranjini asked Ravi what he prayed for. He said, oh, well, I just prayed for enlightenment. She said, oh, enlightenment. Well, she was a little, I thought she would pray for a happy marriage and children and nice life. So no, Ravi was all focused. He told me also, when he was a teenager, he used to visit Ramanashram with his father, who was then working in Baroda, who is now the president of Ramanashram. He said one day he went into the Samadhi hall, And his father said, wait here, I have to do something, I'll come and get you, then we'll go to our house, which is across the street and down the road. So he waited there in the Samadhi house. And he was just sitting there sort of idly, not thinking anything. All of a sudden, he became absorbed in a great peace, an overwhelming experience. And he was just lost in that for some time. Then his father came back and shook him and said, let's go. And he got up. And he said, Appa, I just had this experience. I don't know what it was. I felt like, all expansive, that there was only me, there's only the self. Whatever that was, I don't know. And his father said, oh, that's all right, a lot of people have that. Come on, let's go. So, I always, in his last days also, he used to call me and discuss things of his experience when he was also, when he had he had the steatoblastoma, a brain tumor. And when it occurred the first time, he was down in Texas, and he used to work out in the morning before he started his work. He always had at some hotel. And he was lifting some weights. All of a sudden, he's lifting the weights, and he was becoming unconscious, and he laid back. And someone was nearby and held the weight. And then he was becoming unconscious, and he thought perhaps he was dying. So he said to himself, all right, I'm dying, but I have the girls. Girls means his 2 daughters and wife. What will happen to them? And then he remembered a verse from Aksharamana, and he kept repeating in him. And all of a sudden he experienced that same experience he had there in that Samadhi hall many years earlier. But he woke up in a hospital. And then he went through a period of 2 years, and he died near Duke University, or Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And one of the last things he said, which reminded me about one of the last things that Bhagavan said before he passed away, was, did anyone feed the peacocks? Because the peacocks went and were screeching on the roof. So I consider myself like a peacock, because before he passed away, one of the few last things he could speak, he said, give Dennis, that means the ashram, the car. So I consider him like he's remembering me as he's going. So I consider this was an ideal devotee who could practice Bhagavan's teachings and still living in the world, having a high profession, but he was all focused on Ramana Maharshi. He would call his father every day. His mind was all with Bhagavan. So this it can happen to everyone, to serve. And you don't have to be in an ashram to do that. So I'm supposed to be talking about what now? She gave me instructions when I asked her what I should speak about. I have some nice, something written here that we read at the retreat. We had a 4-day retreat in Tampa, and we always conclude on January 1st. And on the 31st at midnight, we have a program down by the river, this Hillsborough River, and we chant what we just chanted, the Aksharamala and Arunachala Shiva. If you get the newsletter, you can read about it, but this was read at the retreat, and it was written by, it was probably dictated by Kunja Swami, someone wrote it down. We all knew Kunja Swami, we knew other old devotees of Bhagavan. There was Ramaswami Pillai, there was N.N. Rajan, there was Professor T.N. Krishnamurti, there was Swami Vishwanathan. I met all these old devotees when I used to go there in the 70s and the 80s. And you can say Kanakama was one of the last ones who died, and also 2010 on Bhagavan's Jayanthi day, standing in front of Bhagavan's Samadhi. So she was one of the last ones who had moved there, lived with Bhagavan for the purpose of fulfilling their life and experiencing the fulfillment of the teachings of Bhagavan. So, but Kunja Swami, all these devotees I had met, if you went to ask them any questions, they would say, you're asking me the question. And I said, yes. And they said, why are you asking me? Because Bhagavan is here now. You just go to the Samadhi hall. Even in the olden days, when Bhagavan was sitting there, we didn't have to orally ask questions, although many were asked. But many of the sincere devotees, they just sat there in their mind. And the question may be answered. You read it in talks to some reply to someone, but Bhagavan may be answering the question to another person sitting by, although that answer is given to a person who answered the question. It happened like that, and most people, they would sit and Bhagavan would answer their question, either by dissolving that question into nothing and giving them the peace of the fruit of the answer of that question, or he would answer that question in some way indirectly. So these old devotees, although many of them were very enlightened souls, they would never take on the position of a guru. They would think themselves to be guru. Bhagavan was so present to them that where were they? They believed they didn't exist, only Bhagavan exists. So how could they be a guru? Although they guided just by their life many of the people. So Kunja Swami, he said that Sri Bhagavan detailed explanations of self-inquiry do not mean that his emphasis on this method was absolute or dogmatic. Sri Kunja Swami relates how the Maharshi gave all methods their due place, citing concrete instances. Sri Bhagavan's presence and teachings gave hope and strength to different classes of secrets at different levels. Thus the teachings were not limited to those who took to pure inquiry, as is sometimes assumed. I know I've met many people over the years. They have read Bhagavan teachings. They're so direct. Really, for a Westerner, that's what first attracted me to Ramana Maharshi and his life and teachings. I read the teaching. This is so simple and so direct. So they would read those and they would practice it and they would have some experience. And they say, okay, we only want self-inquiry. Everything else is a distraction from that. And only self-inquiry will take us to the goal. And this is true. But how many people are ready to sit and focus their mind on the mind or on the source of the mind and do that solely throughout the day and night? Very few. So, but as a jnani was on a level higher than that of the spiritual master, and therefore it followed that whatever one's path, one received help and guidance. No attempt at changing one's approach was needed. An important teaching of his was that intensity of practice and one-pointedness on any path will be fruitful. It's really not how long you sit for meditation. It's with what intensity you do it for the short periods that you'll do it. That's the most important thing, the intensity, or the one-pointedness. It's not the length of time. So, an important teachings of his was that the intensity of practice and one-pointedness on any path will be fruitful. Stotra, reciting hymns or japa, mantras or dhyana, meditation, and vichara, self-inquiry, are ascending stages of sadhana. While confirming this, Bhagavan was always clear that this did not mean that all stages were necessary to be gone through by all. Certainly, there were exceptions, as for in the case of the 4 great Tamil saints who sang the praises of Lord Shiva. With them, it was an achievement of akhandakara, vritti, unbroken experience of awareness, brought about by constant remembrance of the name. Quote, "Never was there a moment when I did not think of you." Unquote. In that achievement, where was the need for vichara, or self-inquiry? Its result was already there. Dandapana Swami once pleaded with Bhagavan to give him some upadesha. It was a Shivaratri day. The devotee affirmed he had no practice to his credit. But Bhagavan persistently asked him whether he had done any little practice of any kind. At last, the fact emerged that he used to write the Rama Koti, a crore of Rama Nama. They would write in the book. Sri Bhagavan instructed him to do it more and more. One doubt that often assails people relates to the relative superiority of mantras. Sri Bhagavan explained that the choice of a particular mantra purely depended upon one's samskaras. There is no superiority or inferiority in the mantras themselves. In the choice of the mantra, as in other things, it was characteristic of Sri Bhagavan to encourage one in a path already chosen so that it acted like a lever resulting in more progress. In olden days, when we had the benefit of receiving personal instruction from Bhagavan, one of them was to get into meditation before going to sleep. Thus, sleep overtook one as a natural consequence of fatigue and was not induced or preceded by lying down. Kunja Swami used to tell me he used to sleep in the old hall with Bhagavan, but Bhagavan was always sitting up and reclining on the sofa. So they didn't feel like lying down and going to sleep until Bhagavan had slept. But how to tell if Bhagavan had slept? He was just sitting there. So they felt uncomfortable, so they would meditate, and now and then open their eyes and have a look. But Kunja Swami said, so when they saw his head go back a little bit, boom, they lie down. But they had to wait till that. So, but in those days, early days, anybody used to come into the old hall and sleep right there on the floor with Bhagavan. That's the uniqueness of Ramana Maharshi, his openness. He never restricted people from seeing him, even on his last day. He wouldn't stop the queue from coming by just to have darshan of him. He never, had his voice recorded, but he let them take many photographs. As you heard the presentation last time of Durga about his grandfather, T.N. Krishna Swami, how he took most of the photos of Bhagavan. He allowed that because he realized, if you look at the picture here, and anywhere you go in the room, you see his eyes looking at you. What's within is pouring out. Within a few moments of that picture was taken, another picture was taken, and he's looking inward. And his eyes are open, but he's not there. He's there, but he's everywhere. But here, he seems to be pouring out his grace or his kindness through his eyes. So, he was saying that we should meditate before we fall asleep. Also, the first thing in the morning, immediately on getting up from bed, one was to go into meditation. Then the state of mind immediately before sleep would be resumed on waking. This would ensure a serenity of mind and also a feeling of tirelessness throughout the day. So parayana, recitation, japa, dhyana, meditation, and vichara usually represent different modes of sadhana, but it may not be possible for the sadhaka to be engaged in any one of these continuously. So Sri Bhagavan's advice was to alternately try all the four to ensure continued sadhana, which would be otherwise impossible. Thus, if one tires of doing meditation, one can do japa, following it up with parayana, and so on. Kunja Swami is saying, my practice was to recite slokas on my walk to Skandashram in the morning. One day Bhagavan happened to see me and asked me what I was doing. When I told him about my parayana, he encouraged it and said it was a good way to simultaneously go through one's routine and to also do something towards controlling the mind. Sri Bhagavan stressed the importance of developing good tendencies, likening it to the sowing of ripe seed. Also, Kunja Swami had said about that, to do the parayana, to do the japa, to do the dhyana, and also the self-inquiry, and always have self-inquiry as your goal. All those methods are for the purpose of calming the mind. Also doing pranayama, to just watching the breath. One finds also if one meditates deeply, the breath becomes very still automatically. And the breath and mind, they say, the breath is a horse, the mind is a rider. If the horse stops, the mind stops. And if the mind stops, the horse stops. The breath will stop also. And then one goes deeper and deeper. But Bhagavan also, what I have read, and he told us before, that Bhagavan told him to keep self-inquiry as the goal, because but all these other methods help to control the mind, to make it one-pointed. So a ripe seed thrown carelessly on a rocky soil will sprout and grow, but even after 1,000 years, it will never go to waste. Likewise, good tendencies. Asked on one occasion how it could be that self-knowledge is easy, the easiest thing there is, referring to Bhagavan's poem on self-knowledge, while others said that it was the most difficult thing there was, and whether the individual could get it so easily and unaided, Bhagavan seemed to sympathize and pointed out the words, grace is needed most, in the same poem. He said that this was the key to understanding that poem. So that was Kunja Swami, which many of us know. And if you look in our newsletter, I've been serializing some diary entries by a devotee from New York, Evelyn Kieslow Safier. She was visiting Ramana Ashram in 1982, writing about her experiences with Kunja Swami. You'll find those very elevating and very fresh and revealing and inspiring. So, I got all my pages mixed up here. But I wanted to say something about the Bhagavan's Jayanti. So, I know Sunita sends out the Jayanti poems of Bhagavan every year, right? The 2 verses he wrote. And on the first Jayanti program in 1912, it was the Vasudev Shastri was the one who instigated it and insisted that they cook food and eat it in the ashram. So this is in Virupaksha. They had no utensils, or they had no food, so they had to go beg the food and get some utensils from somebody and cook it. And Bhagavan was very insistent that no, that should not be done. We're not cooking food in the ashram. We go out to beg our food. But then the Vasudev Shastri said, he said, what is it to you? It's for us. So why should you object? And they celebrated the birthday, the first year. Recalling its occasion, Bhagavan said, while I was in Virupaksha cave on my birthday, 1912, those around me insisted on cooking food and eating it there as a celebration of the occasion. I tried to dissuade them, but they rebelled, saying, what harm does it do to Bhagavan if we sit here and eat food? Therefore, I left it at that. They immediately purchased some vessels and created the birthday that year for the first time. But what began as a small function has resulted in all this paraphernalia and pomp. Now, if you've seen recently the Jayanthi program going on now at Ramana, I'm sure they're quite mild compared to the ones saw in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Everything must take its own course and will not stop at our request. I argued with them at great length, but they did not listen. When the cooking and eating were over, Ishwara Swami, who was with me at those days, said, "Swami, today being your birthday, please compose 2 verses, and I too will compose 2. So that was something Ishwara Swami used to do often with Bhagavan. He said, "You compose and I compose." So Bhagavan got his chance to let him have it. So in the first verse he said, "You who intend to celebrate the birthday, first ascertain as to from where you were born. The day that we attain a place in that everlasting life which is beyond the birth and death is our real birthday. And 2, at least on the birthday, we ought to lament that we got this body and fell into this world. Instead, we celebrate the event with a feast." Something's wrong with us, definitely. To rejoice over this is like decorating a corpse. Wisdom consists in realizing the self and in getting absorbed in the self. Now, there was a rejoinder written about those 2 verses by Major Chadwick. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. So Major Chadwick, who came to Bhagavan in 1935 and passed away in 1982, you'll see his samadhi there, Ramana next to Cohen and H.C. Khanna and Lucy Cornelissen. It's in the ashram there. So Major Chadwick also had his chance to give his rebuttal. And he wrote, "You tell me not to celebrate the day when I was born. Seeing it led me to thy feet, why therefore should I mourn? Births in the past were filled with woe, but this one's freed from pain. For having thee, I surely know that freedom I'll attain." So that's the great enjoiner which we all support. So I wanted to tell you a story about Kanakama. Oh, I'm almost done, right? And September 1st, 1990, Kanakama, which some of you have met, she came to the New York ashram. Then we were renting a house in Queens, New York. Her niece had brought her to the U.S. and took her around, showed her things. And she wanted to come to the ashram. So she spent a night there, and we had our program, Bhagavan's Advent at Arunachala on that day. So she told us a story, which I had told before, which would be nice if I tell, preceding what I want to conclude with. And that page I can't find, so I'll tell the story. So, I've told this before, but it's very interesting. So what happened one day when she was there was a devotee who had a reel-to-reel tape recorder. And he was outside the old hall. And he wanted to bring it in to record Bhagavan. And he was a little hesitant that devotees are going to object if he brings this tape recorder and microphone, just like this, and sets it before Bhagavan and records him. But he did it anyhow, and Bhagavan asked him, what was that? He told him it was a tape recorder. And then Bhagavan started inquiring, how does it work? You know, how does it make a recording? How does it play it back? And all these technical details about the recorder. So he felt encouraged and more confident that he's going to succeed in recording Bhagavan's voice. So he set it up like this, and he put the recorder on the floor next to Bhagavan, and he said, Bhagavan, we're going to record your voice. And Bhagavan didn't say anything, so he turned it on. And so Bhagavan sat like he usually sits. He told everybody, be quiet, we're going to record Bhagavan's voice. Nobody could talk or make any noise. So all you could hear was a swish, swish, swish of the reel going around and around in the room. That's all. And so they waited 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Bhagavan just sat there, everyone sat there, and the devotee got up. And he turned off the recorder. And he said to Bhagavan, Bhagavan, if we're going to record your voice, please, you have to speak something. Unless you speak, how can we record your voice? And Bhagavan said, how do you know you did not record my voice? I did speak. But my voice is silenced. It's been recorded. And then Muruganar, who was sitting in the room, got up and said, what are you doing? You turned off the machine. At least we could have gotten him recording that. So that's when he tried to record his voice. And about silence, I want to read that silence that was a keynote of, Bhagavan's presence and why people continue to go there. I tell people who go there now, who haven't gone there before, I said, we sit at home and we do meditation, we do stotras, we try to control the mind, we try to focus on the self and realize our true nature. But when you walk into the gate of Ramana, there's a pervading peace which takes hold of you, and you can experience without all that effort. And then you can just go deep into it. So, someone did this Sri Swami Tapovanji Maharaj. You heard of him? Chinmayan is Guru. So, in Uttar Kashi Himalayas. He went to visit Bhagavan when he was young, brahmachari. So he wrote a beautiful little piece about his experience. Let me make sure I got both the pages here. So, Tapovanji Maharaj wrote, silence is truth. Silence is bliss. Silence is peace. And hence, silence is Atman. To live in this silence is the goal. It is moksha. It is the end of this endless cycle of births and deaths. Sri Ramana Maharshi was an embodiment of silence. He was silence itself. Therefore, he did not preach the silence. Only when one comes back to the noise from the silence can one preach the silence. How can the silence preach itself through silence? Nearly 40 years ago, I had the good fortune of having the darshan of the Maharshi at Tiruvannamalai when I was living there in a cave when he was living there in a cave along with his mother and brother. One midday, I, a young brahmachari at the time, climbed to the cave, saw the Maharshi there, and placing a bunch of bananas at his feet, bowed and sat before him. At the same moment, some monkey jumped into the scene, scrambled for the fruits, and ran away with them. The Maharshi looked lovingly into my face. That was all. He spoke, but silence. Not a word passed between us. A supreme, a dynamic, and divine silence prevailed. An hour passed by, all in silence. He rose for his bhiksha. I too rose from my seat, bowed again, and walked down the hill. The divine silence sank deeper and deeper into me with each step. Someone came running behind me and pressed me to take some prasad. Thankfully, I declined. I was full, so full with the silence. The Maharshi called him back and advised him not to press me. Then I continued walking away. Maharshi was an image of peace and silence. It is the first duty of all those who admire and follow him to seek that divine silence. The inquiry into the divine silence is but the inquiry, who am I? O man, inquire and be immersed in that inner silence. Do all works of this world to reach that goal, to attain that divine silence. The ocean surface dances in waves, laughs in sparkling foam, roars in its thunderous waves, clap and clash. And yet deep in its inner vaults it rests in eternal silence and peace. Without such a divine and spiritual depth, the works and activities of this universe prove worthless and aimless. Quote, work should be undertaken and pursued to take us ultimately to the workless abode of divine silence and endless peace. Unquote. This is the secret doctrine of all our Vedas and ancient scriptures. Okay, thank you.